You're listening to the Future Tech Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies such as artificial intelligence, stem cells, 3D printing, gene editing, Bitcoin, blockchain, the microbiome, quantum computing, virtual reality, and exploring space are much closer than you might think. In fact, many early versions of these technologies are in play right now, and the companies that are using these technologies are the focus of this podcast. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a thorny medical problem. Remember, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and tell your friends about it. Thank you. Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Future Tech and Future Tech Health podcast. I have Dr. Cate Shanahan. She's a physician and a biochemist. She's examined diets around the world that are known to produce the healthiest and most long-lived people. Diets like the Mediterranean diet, Okinawan people, and Blue Zone people. And it looks like she's identified what's in common to them. So we're going to be talking about that and her new book about deep nutrition. So Cate, thanks for coming. How you doing?
Hi, I'm good. Thanks for having me on your show.
Yeah, I've noticed that people in the health field, unfortunately they've had a difficult background. Usually they've dealt with a condition themselves or family member. If you don't mind sharing what's some of your background.
Yeah, so around 2001, I got what I thought was a curse in my knee when I lived on Hawaii, and I moved some rocks from one island to the next. You're not supposed to do that because no one of the doctors that I saw could explain what was going on. It was swollen and hurt. I was getting fevers. I couldn't walk. I had surgery. Nothing helped. Really what was going on was I had a virus that sort of took up residence in my knee based on the fact that my diet was pretty horrible. And I didn't know it because I thought I was eating really pretty healthy. I was doing everything you're supposed to do based on what doctors are taught in medical school, which is as complex as what an 8-year-old can read from the back of a Cheerios box. There's really not much to the science of nutrition that doctors learn in medical school. Same goes for dietitians. It's not like doctors are worsely educated than dietitians. We all learn the same stuff, and it's all wrong. The idea that, saturated fat clogs your arteries and raises your cholesterol, and cholesterol is bad for you, and salt gives you hypertension, all that stuff that you read on the cereal boxes and all that they use to advertise, so-called healthy junk food is all nonsense. And I had learned basically nothing of any value in my entire, many years of training, not just medical school, but college, and high school and back to grade school where we start learning things, we start getting the brainwashing starts young. And so I had to reverse all of that brainwashing when I got sick in order to understand what a healthy human diet really looked like. And that pursuit became the book called Deep Nutrition, Why Your Genes Need Traditional Food, where I talk about the 4 pillars of the human diet. And by the way, I did get better.
Okay.
My knee got better.
Okay, what are the 4 pillars that you figured out?
So these are elements common to every single cuisine before, globalization and the industrialization changed the way we produce and enjoy our food. And they're still common to many cuisines. So there's 4 of them. The first one, simply fresh food that exists the way it exists, whether it's fruit or raw milk, like real dairy products are raw and not pasteurized or homogenized. Sushi is another example, uncooked fish. So raw food, every culture has some form of raw food and many forms of raw food. Fresh vegetables, of course, in the places around the world where people grew vegetables, we had access to those. So that's the first pillar. And it really is just, common sense and the way people thought through and solved problems in the past. Because if they had too much fresh food, they didn't want it to go to waste, so they found ways to preserve it. And that's what fermentation is. So that's the next pillar, fermented and sprouted foods. fermentation, like yogurt. We preserve milk a little bit longer. We preserve it for a lot longer when we make cheese. And the other half of that is sprouting. So we work with nature to take things that naturally preserve themselves, like seeds, and wake them up. So sprouting grains gives us sprouted grain bread and a lot of other, you can sprout beans and so on. So that's the first two. And then the third pillar of the human diet is meat on the bone. And I include the on the bone part specifically because, less people eat meat, but very few people think about the fact that there's still nutrition in the connective tissue, in the bones and the joints that we right now mostly just waste, throw away, or send to the pharmaceutical company so they can sell it back to us in the form of collagen supplements or collagen injections because it's deficient from our diet. So that's meat on the bones. So we used to save the bones, boil them, make soup out of them, gnaw on the ends of the bones, directly because it has flavor. And then the last pillar is called organ meat. And these deserve special mention because when people raised animals or hunted them or grazed them, however we, got access to animals, we didn't just use the muscle meat. We did the nose to tail thing, and we ate every bit that we could possibly figure out how to make it taste good, which was pretty much every bit. And this is universal around the world. So it's not just Okinawan. It's not just people in Japan did, too. Obviously, they whatever animals they made use of around the world, they just made use of the whole thing, including the organs. And the thing about organs that a lot of folks don't consider is that they are really powerhouses of nutrition. When we have the muscle meat of the animal, which is really all that we use these days, we don't even use the fat, we don't use the skin very often. Now we have boneless, skinless chicken products. But,
question in that regard. So again, wherever I eat, it looks like it's always the chicken breast and it's the white meat that they put in sandwiches and whatever. What happens to the millions and maybe even billions of chickens that are killed, for instance? What happens to all the other parts of them? Is it just ground up and fed to other chickens or thrown away? Because we're missing, it looks like, a lot of what's there.
Not a lot is thrown away. So it does get used, but it gets used not for human consumption. It's used for pet food, a lot of it, and then can be used to make different industrial products, anything from carpet backing to different forms of glue and all kinds of stuff that it gets used for. So it doesn't usually go to waste, but we don't get to benefit from it. And when we don't get to benefit from it, we're missing a lot of nutrition. So a lot of folks know that most of us are deficient. We don't get anywhere near the recommended daily allowances of most of the vitamins and minerals. And the way that we used to do that was because we used to eat different organs, and each organ of an animal's body is basically a powerhouse of a different nutritional profile. So the muscle meat, which is all that we eat now, is a great source of amino acids. But aside from amino acids, there's also vitamins, minerals, and essential fatty acids, and lots of antioxidants. And without getting the organ meat that we still need, we don't easily reach nutrient sufficiency, especially those of us who don't need 2,000 calories a day or will gain weight, right? So my calorie budget is somewhere around 1,500, and it's almost impossible to get 100% of my body's needs for vitamins and minerals on that few calories. So I have to supplement. But people didn't used to do that. We used to have liver, we used to have kidney, we would have all the different organs of the body. Each one, like I say, has a different nutritional profile. And so, for example, liver is really high in B vitamins and certain minerals. Kidney is really high in another different profile of nutrients. Even bone marrow, there's certain fatty acids and vitamins that are really high in bone marrow. And all the body parts, eyeballs have vitamin A, testicles have vitamin E. So we never let anything go to waste. But now we do, and our animals actually eat much more. Animals eating canned dog food and cat food are getting a higher quality food than most human beings that are feeding them.
Well, do you think, if I buy a chicken from the store and I buy a whole chicken and decide to eat that whole chicken. Do you even think that's a good idea? Because probably, unless that chicken was really well cared for, it was fed, who knows what, and given hormones to beef up its breast and make it huge. And I mean, is it even a good idea to try to eat the organ meats of animals unless they're like pasture raised or grass fed or, really super well cared for?
It's a better idea to get the most high quality, and if you can get in kind of pasture raised or more humanely produced, it's going to be better. It's going to be more nutritious. But it's still, otherwise, then we just don't get the nutrition, or we supplement with pills, which are far inferior. The synthetic products are not the same as what nature makes. And when we consume them in isolation, which is what happens, when we consume them without the food, without the other nutrients that they're normally encapsulated with when we eat food, our bodies don't know how to utilize it as efficiently. So it's not as good. So, bottom line is, yeah, it's totally true that, Tyson and a whole bunch of other brand name chickens are not as good for you, but, not as good for you as if you could if you raised it yourself, certainly, or if you have like a local farmer or something. But it's still given that it's really one of the best options. Another really good option is to avoid animal products altogether and just do lots and lots of the highest quality, or not animal products altogether, but try to do eggs and dairy still. And then you can do lots of spices, because herbs and spices can be like the superfoods of the vegetable world. But the problem is that many of them are grown in foreign countries where there's just tons of lead and other toxins in the fertilizers. So that's not a great solution either. So, we really are, there's kind of like, you're almost damned if you do and damned if you don't. So you may as well just do whatever you like better, right? If you don't like the idea of eating animals, then try to have more herbs and spices and, nutrient dense vegetables, and ferment your vegetables, and, try to sprout your beans and sprout your grains. That increases the nutritional value of everything. And if you don't like doing all that, then go ahead and just get the best quality animal products that you can, and make the best of it. Make the best tasting meals that you can. Really, it's all about flavor, because flavor is nutrition. And what we did when we scientifically analyzed the cuisines of the world was we looked at traditional recipes, and that's how we found that there are these 4 common elements in all traditional cuisines around the world, by looking at the recipes.
Well, let's talk about that. So how did you even think to do this, and what was your analysis? Like, what does it look like? Like, so you talked about organ meats. Pick a culture. What do they do? How do they literally use every part of the animal? What's an example of some of their recipes?
Yeah, so sausage. Even in the movie The Blue Zones by Dan Buettner, which came out just before Deep Nutrition came out, the first edition of Deep Nutrition came out. This gentleman was a journalist. He went to a couple places around the world where they have fairly long lifespans compared to the average, and he found people that were just following whatever the culture's tradition was. So, for example, he went to, I think it was Sardinia in Italy, somewhere in Italy, I think it was Sardinia. And he met an Italian gentleman there who was like butchering a lamb or a goat or something. And he was up to his elbows basically in making sausage meat. And so sausage is a totally common element to pretty much all of European cultures. And for good reason, because it's a great way when you have like a Mediterranean climate, which is relatively dry, relatively predictable season, and need to slaughter animals at the same time because of the climate needs, or because of your climate, right? Like you can't if it's too dry, you can't feed them all during the dry season, so you slaughter them. You need to preserve them. The dryness helps preserve them. So they just worked with nature to find a way of utilizing the foods that they had on hand. So that's one super common way that they preserved organ meat, as well as some fat and some muscle meat in most of Europe. another thing that they did was make cheese, right? So pretty much everywhere has some form of dairy that's been fermented. Where it's colder, they tend to make cheese. Where it's warmer, they tend to drink it fresh and make yogurt out of it. Just I think because of the bacteria, like that you need to have cold for an extended time period for the bacteria that make cheese for us. I don't even know if it's bacteria. It might be some fungus too. I should say microbes. So cold weather microbes seem to be conducive to growing cheese. So in the colder climates of Europe, they made tons of cheese. In the warmer climates in Africa and Asia, they make tons of yogurt. And in the Middle East, they make yogurt cheese. It's kind of funny. So it's like a softer cheeses. But so that's pretty much universal to much of the world, not so much South America and North America, but pretty much the rest of the world. They do use a lot of dairy. Not so much on the little tiny Pacific islands where it was harder to travel with large dairy animals to places like Hawaii and the Philippines, but where it was practical to bring these excellent sources of renewable food. You just feed your animal, or your animal grazes on its own, and you just have to milk it a few times a day. So dairying is a huge tradition. So those are just a couple of examples of stuff that's common in large swaths of the world. And in the places where they have, where it's on an island, you'll find tons of raw fish. You'll find that more often, or you'll find, like in Hawaii, they found something called poi, which is a root vegetable that has been dried and pounded and rehydrated and then fermented. So this taro actually gets made into poi by this process. And so they just found that taro root was something that grew really well in the relatively extremely acid and fairly unconducive to most farming practices type soil that you find in Hawaii. There's not a lot that actually grows there very well. Like, it's really hard to get good tomatoes in Hawaii. You have to remediate the soil in a whole bunch of ways.
Again, part of the problem is that a lot of the people listening, for instance, live in an urban area. They depend on the food that's brought to them, by grocery store, restaurant, or whatever it is. And from my experience, a lot of the nutrition is invisible to the eye. So what are some recommendations for people that live in urban areas? What can they do that's feasible for them?
Well, I have lots of solutions in our book, Deep Nutrition. What do you do in an average grocery store? What's like a good shopping list? I have that in the last chapter of the book. But basically, so if we want to switch gears and just talk about, go from talking about traditions and what they all had in common to what you can do in your average grocery stores, basically the stuff you've probably already heard of, which is, shop from the edges. You want to avoid the processed food. The worst thing in the grocery store is anything that is made with vegetable oil. And vegetable oil is kind of like a unknown toxin that hardly anybody's talking about, but it's actually my specialty. And this is where the biochemistry that I learned when I was at Cornell University really radically changed the way I eat. And this is really what convinced me that everything I'd learned in medical school about saturated fat and cholesterol was wrong, because it did not take into account the biochemistry of these vegetable oils, which is the defining feature of junk food. When you talk about junk food, you think of Twinkies and chips. You look at the ingredients, you're not going to find butter in there. You're not going to find cream. You're not going to find any kind of natural saturated fat in there. You're going to find vegetable oil that is polyunsaturated and unstable, or has been hydrogenated and rendered solid. Either way, either the polyunsaturated vegetable oil or the hydrogenated vegetable oil is toxic. And that is why junk food is unhealthy. Nobody disagrees that junk food is unhealthy. So what my husband and I did when we wrote Deep Nutrition is we just defined what is the main ingredient that makes junk food unhealthy, and that's vegetable oil. So if you can avoid that, whatever your grocery store is, there are some products that don't have vegetable oil, and you'll really go a long way towards avoiding the most toxic foods out there. And unfortunately, these vegetable oils have made their way into a lot of so-called health products like lean cuisine and salad dressing, and places you wouldn't suspect. So it's absolutely essential that you start looking for vegetable oils if you care at all about your health.
Well, what's the problem with vegetable oil? Just can you give a few details on it? Is it wrong? Is it bad when it's cooked, or is it just bad to be in the food, period?
The answer is yes, it's bad when it's heated because it's unstable. Now, the problem is when you are talking about something unstable, you have to consider how much you're eating. Because if you put a whole bunch of something unstable together, then even if you don't heat it, it can destabilize. And that's what's happening in our bodies right now, because 80% of the average American fat calories come from vegetable oils, and their composition is really high in a kind of fat called polyunsaturated fat. So if you've heard of saturated fat being bad for you, first of all, it's wrong, but you've heard a similar term, saturated, versus polyunsaturated. There are different kinds of fatty acids, and the amount of polyunsaturated fatty acids in our diet now is 10 to 20 times higher than what it was before these vegetable oils were invented, before the industrial era, when we ate, most of our fats came from actual real whole foods, plants, animals, so on. So our bodies are not designed to handle this much of these polyunsaturated, unstable fatty acids. And the fact that they are in our fat right now, if you've been eating a whole ton of these polyunsaturated fatty acids, they build up in your body fat like a toxin and have toxic effects, and it's what leads to diabetes. And that is actually the topic of my next book. So in Deep Nutrition, I talk about how these vegetable oils cause heart disease, how they cause mutations in your DNA that can be passed on to your children, how they cause Alzheimer's and memory problems, and how getting them out of your diet, no matter how old you are, your body's going to start to work better in all kinds of ways. You can reverse arteriosclerosis. You can open up totally blocked arteries by getting these oils out of your diet and starting to eat the human diet, which basically is a vegetable oil-free diet. And if you can, have some yogurt for fermented food. If you can, have some liver pills instead of organ meats if you don't like that, and have some bone broth that is now available in almost every grocery store. So you can get all four pillars in your average grocery store, and you can do it without breaking the budget if you plan. But the vegetable oils are the underlying cause of diabetes. A lot of folks are under the impression that it's sugar and carbohydrates, but that sugar and carbohydrates are, you can consume them actually. You don't have to fully restrict them in order to have a healthy diet. What you really have to fully restrict are these vegetable oils. And I explain why in both Deep Nutrition and my next book, The Fat Burn Fix.
How pervasive are vegetable oils in packaged foods? Probably
99% of the stuff in the middle of the grocery store that everyone agrees is bad for you, you're going to find these. So you almost can't buy chips. You have to go to a Whole Foods to find chips made in olive oil, coconut oil, or just shop online. That's really the easiest thing to do, since you're already probably listening to this podcast.
That's what I was going to ask you. That's a vegetable oil is a no-no, but what oils are workable for cooking and for foods being processed in?
So the traditionally used sources of oils, which are coconut, olive, avocado really wasn't used traditionally, but it so happens that it's very stable, and now we're seeing a lot of it, and it's just totally fine. Butter, and then all animal fats, which you're not going to really find, but I'm just going to list them. Lard and tallow. Actually, back when I was a kid, McDonald's French fries were fried in a mixture of lard and like sesame oil, but it was mostly lard, and they were so much better than they are today, I can tell you.
If you do end up having vegetable oil, are there some that are worse than others? What's the best of it, what's the worst of it, or is it just all bad?
Well, let me just list them out. So the ones that you want to avoid, there's 3 C's and 3 S's that you're going to find in your average grocery store. So the C's are corn, canola, cottonseed, and the S's are soy, sunflower, safflower. So crackers, pastries, tater tots, frozen dinners, frozen burritos, dehydrated fruit, sun chips, veggie chips, pretty much any kind of packaged good is going to have these vegetable oils. So that's why everyone agrees you should not shop in the middle of the grocery store. You should shop on the edges. You should just get fresh food And there are ways that you can make meals from fresh food without even cooking anything. And that's what I talk about in both Deep Nutrition, and I elaborate on that more in the next book that's coming out in the spring of 2020, The Fat Burn Fix. That, it's not like you have to cook meals from scratch, breakfast, lunch, and dinner if you don't use packaged foods. You can you can assemble meals pretty quickly, no cooking required. You just need to find the right products that are, made with the best quality, and they are affordable, and they are in your average grocery store.
So you have your book, but what's become your role? Are you personally advising people in, like a diet coach capacity, or, what have you been doing? I mean, not that you've been lazy, you've been doing a lot, but what do you find yourself doing professionally now these days?
So I work for a company that's hired me to basically eradicate diabetes from the company, and I am working with their employees and creating group programs, educational resources, and working with them one-on-one to reverse everyone's diabetes.
Okay, any anecdotes you can share? No names or anything, but any stories or, transformations or interesting things you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, it turns out that if someone puts their mind to it, they can go from being a diabetic that has to take insulin shots and additionally a couple other pills, and still has blood sugar levels in the high 100s to 200s, to within 2 weeks being totally off their medications and having blood sugars that are 100 points lower than they were. So I see that all the time, and that's just 2 weeks. If you keep going with the same, healthy foods, avoiding the vegetable oils, controlling your carbohydrates, limiting how many times a day you snack, you can be basically free of diabetes. That's why I say my mission here is to eradicate diabetes in this company that I'm working for.
What are some interesting things you've seen as you're working with people in the company? Like how many people are there, and has there been resistance, and what's worked versus not?
Yeah, so the only resistance is that it's hard for people to change habits. So there's 1,600 employees, and I've worked pretty closely with 120 of them, and probably nearly 1,000 have read the resources and have made small changes. Not all of them have diabetes, obviously, but the ones who have diabetes who work with me are universally able to get off medications, and it's really fun watching their numbers just plummet, their blood sugars. We check their blood sugars regularly. I have all that equipment here, and you can see them, fall, like I say, within a matter of days, actually. They start falling, and then if they continue doing the plan, then they are basically no longer diabetic, and that's extremely rewarding. It doesn't matter actually if they lose weight, but usually they all lose at least 20, 30 pounds in the process.
But are you restricting their sugar or carbs, or what are some examples of what you're doing? Is it mostly the vegetable oil portion, or what's an example of what some people done?
So, let's say a healthy breakfast would be just like a coffee with a whole bunch of half and half in it. Nice and simple. You have enough half and half there. You get 300-400 calories. But there's very little carbohydrate in half and half, but there is some. But most of it is in the form of lactose sugar, which is actually a prebiotic and really good for your gut flora. And so then they can make it all the way till lunch. We have a chef here. She does all kinds of fancy lunches. Just one example is she'll do salads with a certain kind of Middle Eastern rice called freaky. So we have some, I call them slow digesting carbohydrates, these whole grain, traditional rices and stuff. And she will have a little bit of a crumble of that. It's really delicious. And then any kind of protein. So often she'll make a chicken breast that she'll saute up, and then in all kinds of herbs and spices. And then she'll have a delicious dressing that she makes with the traditional oils. It's really important to make your own salad dressing. And so that's one of the main reasons we hired a chef, is because you can't get good salad dressing in Orlando. And people love their salads for lunch. So that's what we serve them for lunch. And then I don't encourage any snacking. Every time you snack, you aren't doing your body any favors. There's no such thing as a healthy snack, because anytime you consume calories, you're basically telling your body to stop burning fat between meals, and that's very unhealthy. So, and then a nice dinner that you could make easily at home would be like, well, now that the keto diet's so popular, I encourage people to use keto recipes because they include healthy fats, right? They're going to encourage, like, you can use bacon, you can use cheese, you can use cream, you can, in order to get a good amount of vegetables and have them taste good, you could just do like a keto casserole, right? So you have some broccoli, a little bit of bacon. You could throw in some more chicken if you want to make it more high in protein. You can have, I'm not full on keto. I do encourage people to have whole food sources of carbohydrates. So like, and I also encourage people to avoid like potatoes and rice, but you can have beans and you can have semi-starchy vegetables like peas and broccoli and Brussels sprouts. Those have a good amount of starch in them. But they should be enjoyed with plenty of healthy fats. Garlic butter, for example, salt is very important for bringing out the flavors of your food, and any kind of meat that you want. So if you don't want to have a casserole, you can make burgers. You can make roast chicken. You can, any food. I just de-emphasize the role of the high carb foods. Like even when we make pasta at home, we really beef up our pasta sauce. No pun intended. Actually, pun intended. With actual beef, more meat and more veggies in the sauce, and we serve very little pasta. Or I actually really nowadays they have pre-zoodled zucchini in the store, so I like the flavor of zucchini. Yeah, I like the flavor of that stuff more than I like pasta now, and it's really good just with hot sauce on it and tons of cheese.
Any other tweaks that are not obvious to people or that surprise them, about the diet, either making it easier or harder to do for them?
Any other what? Did you say tips?
Tweaks that you make, like when you present people with the plan and what to eat, what not to eat. What's their reaction? Are they surprised? Are they thinking, oh, this is going to be hard to do? Or, what do you hear from people at the beginning and then as they do it over the first few days or week?
Yeah. Well, as long as I've sat down with them and picked out things that they like, they're like, this is great. Give me more.
Oh, good. So it's not a particularly tough way to eat. It's inclusive of a lot of foods, and it's not difficult for people.
Yeah, no, we exclude no actual whole food. We include all whole foods, but we do downplay 2 whole foods, and those are potatoes and rice, because those are very, very high in starch and relatively high in calories for how much nutrition they carry. So those are the ones that we downplay the most. They're like the junk food of the whole food world. And fruit. Fruit you want to be careful with too, because we've really bred our fruits to be extremely high in sugar and relatively low in nutrition. So you want to be careful with that.
Just last question or two. I don't know, any particular conditions that people have? It sounds like you're focusing on diabetes. I mean, what are you able to attribute a success percentage? Like, have you had cases that are resistant to no matter what you do or what they're eating, or is it pretty much universal once they fix the eating that they get better?
It's universal. Once they fix the eating that they will get better. Now, some people are so far down the road of type 2 diabetes that they've already got like organ failure and stuff. So that's really, really limited, but what they can actually do, because once your kidneys fail, it's hard to consume whole foods because they tend to be high in nutrients. And when you have kidney failure, certain nutrients you have problems with like potassium and nitrogen. But before you have organ failure, you can pretty much get rid of your diabetes if you follow the plan strictly enough for long enough, right? The healthier you are, the faster it is to reverse a disease. But I
figure the more resilient you are, and the more you can bounce back from whatever you put yourself through so far.
Yeah, exactly. You got it.
Okay, very good. So your book is available on Amazon. Is it on Audible? Like, where can people get it, and what's the full title?
Deep Nutrition, Why Your Genes Need Traditional Food. That's available on Amazon and pretty much on all online retailers. You can get it on Audible. In fact, most of the time it's like free with a new Audible subscription if you don't have one, because they're constantly running promotions on it. because it's really long. So it's a great source of entertainment for hours and hours if you get it on Audible. And if you want to find out a little bit more about me and what else I'm doing, my website is drcate.com, drcate.com.
And do you do? Go ahead, please.
I should mention it's not just diabetes that it responds to this. So I bring up diabetes because actually diabetes is really the dark overlord of all metabolic disease. And we're coming to understand that if you do not have diabetes or prediabetes or any precursor of these conditions, you are pretty much not going to get heart attacks, strokes, even Alzheimer's. And now we're understanding cancer is also a metabolic disease. So if you can eradicate diabetes and prediabetes and sustain the habit changes that, reverse those diseases, you're also making your body basically disease proof of most of the other chronic diseases that everybody's struggling against right now.
Wow, that's big. Do you talk to people individually, or is it just too much and you have to go through the channels of your books? Do you do individual coaching, or does it have to be large groups? Well,
right now I am mostly working on my books and some other products, but at my website I do offer individual coaching when I have the time, right? So right now is not the time, but if you subscribe to the website, you can stay up to date on what I'm doing. And if you're interested, if you have diabetes or prediabetes or a cancer survivor or worried about getting Alzheimer's and you want to work with me, definitely reach out to my website.
Okay. Well, very good. Well, Cate, thank you for coming on the podcast. I appreciate it.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
You're listening to the Future Tech Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Future technologies such as artificial intelligence, stem cells, 3D printing, gene editing, Bitcoin, blockchain, the microbiome, quantum computing, virtual reality, and exploring space are much closer than you might think. In fact, many early versions of these technologies are in play right now, and the companies that are using these technologies are the focus of this podcast. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a thorny medical problem. Remember, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you enjoyed the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and tell your friends about it. Thank you.